British Prime Minister Theresa May just announcing that she will indeed quit as the UK Conservative leader on Friday, June 7th. So the question is, what's next for Britain's exit from the EU if they can ever find a way out? And how could this impact the markets? Joining us now, foreign policy expert Asha Castleberry. She worked with the US mission to the United Nations at the State Department. And Michael Hewson, chief market analyst at CNBC Markets. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Asha, let me begin with you. So now it is official. Finally, Theresa May, and I say finally because this has been certainly in the works for quite some time, she will move out of the way. If indeed Boris Johnson is her replacement, what does that mean? Because he's very much a hard Brexiteer. He's quite happy to bail out with no deal in place. How does this process move forward, knowing that Parliament is not on board with what Boris Johnson wants to do?
Well, this first primarily definitely impacts the European parliamentary elections, which the European Union wanted to avoid previously. They are very disappointed with the fact that the political crisis going on in the UK is spilling into their matters, and they feel that it's just a big distraction. And also with regards to Boris, despite that he will most likely replace her, you know, in terms of negotiating new dates as far as Brexit, the European Union tends to be kind of like more firm of, we're not willing to change the dates. We're sticking with the schedule that we have. So I feel that they're going to be not as flexible as they were prior to.
Michael, let me bring you in. I found it interesting that we saw sterling move higher this morning, which I thought was interesting because it has been coming down on fears that maybe the UK is more likely heading towards a no-deal Brexit. Why are we seeing that uptick in sterling this morning?
Well, yeah, I think you have to put it in the context of where we've come from. We've declined 14 days in a row. We're coming up to a long weekend here in the UK as well as in the US. So I certainly think some of those short positions are being taken off. She's laid out a timetable for her departure, which will be after President Trump leaves these shores after the D-Day commemorations. And ultimately, it really comes down to what happens next. And let's look at the arithmetic in the House of Commons. There is still not a majority for a no-deal Brexit. Now, you could say, well, there's not a majority for anything. But I think the fact that Boris Johnson might become the next leader, and that is a might at the moment because he still needs to make it onto the ticket, and the MPs draw up the ticket, and there's not an awful lot of love lost amongst some Conservative Party MPs towards Boris Johnson. And there's also the fact that the European parliamentary elections could actually dictate how the European Union react to the possibility of a possible extension 5 months from now. If the Liberal Democrats do particularly well, and we'll know the results on Sunday, they could actually afford to cut the UK a little bit of slack while they come to a common position. Right. I think what it does do is it makes a general election probably more likely between now and the end of October.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. Actually, let me follow up on that because, you know, Boris Johnson is going to have the same problem that Theresa May had, and maybe the only way to get a majority in the House of Commons is to go to a general election and try and do better in that to get that, you know, get more votes in Parliament. Is that where we're headed, do you think, Asha?
There's a possibility, and it may happen. It's just that, you know, we have to see how that may impact the Brexit decision. But if so, you know, they have to definitely reach some sort of political consensus in the Parliament, because if not, then it's going to definitely be more political turmoil within that can definitely impact the Brexit process going into the situation in October.
Very quickly, Michael, could there be a scenario where there's a second referendum?
I think that's unlikely. I think simply because of the fact that it will be very, very difficult to actually put together a second referendum in the time allotted. That being said, there's also a concern about legitimacy. The last referendum had a 72% turnout. It's highly unlikely any new referendum would get that. So, you know, I think that is really up in the air.
Yeah, who knows in this process. Asha, Michael, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Thank you.